This is Mosasaurus hoffmannii, and the animal drifting past your screen right now was never supposed to rule an ocean. It was built to walk on land. Tyrannosaurus rex needed 68 million years of terrestrial evolution to produce the most studied land predator in the fossil record. Around 12 meters, roughly 40 feet, of bone and muscle, arriving late in the Cretaceous as the undisputed king of the floodplain. The ocean's answer had a 30 million year head start. By the time the first T-Rex set foot on that floodplain, the animal ruling the global ocean had already been doing so for longer than T-Rex's entire evolutionary lineage would ever exist, already shaping what lived, already deciding what didn't. And it got there from an unlikely starting point: a monitor lizard, a land animal with clawed feet, a forked tongue, and dry scaled skin that somewhere between 98 and 94 million years ago walked into shallow water and never came back out again.
What we're about to find is that this wasn't a failed detour from land to sea. It was one of the most complete engineering conversions evolution has ever run. A body plan stripped down and rebuilt piece by piece until almost nothing of the original blueprint still functioned the way it once had. Almost nothing. That word is going to matter. 75 million years ago, North America did not look like North America. A shallow inland sea called the Western Interior Seaway split the continent north to south. Approximately 3,200 kilometers, roughly 2,000 miles from the Arctic down to the Gulf of Mexico. Nearly 1,000 kilometers, around 620 miles wide at its broadest crossing. Picture the entire Mediterranean Sea dropped through the center of a continent that didn't yet exist in any recognizable form.
The sea existed because the continent was under compression. The Rocky Mountains were being borne to the west, and the crust to the east sagged and flooded under the pressure. Surface waters held around 30 degrees Celsius, roughly 86 degrees Fahrenheit, year-round. Warm, shallow, and dense with fish, ammonites, and turtles. It was also an ocean with nobody sitting at the top of it. The plesiosaurs already living there were competent hunters, but not built for sustained pursuit. The giant ichthyosaurs, fast, warm-bodied animals built along the lines of a tuna, had already declined. Sharks were present, but ecologically modest. The role a great white or an orca fills today, apex predator, population regulator, the animal that keeps an entire food web in balance, was vacant.
An empty ecological seat in a warm and overstocked ocean is not a passive fact. It is a selection pressure with a deadline. In a system with a resource surplus and no top predator, something always arrives to claim it. The only open question was what shape that something would take. And this one arrived, improbably, still carrying a forked tongue.
Here is the biological problem the earliest mosasauroids were solving before any of the famous adaptations existed. How do you hunt in water using a body built entirely for air? Dallosaurus turneri, recovered from Texas and dated to roughly 92 million years ago, is close to an answer preserved in stone. Around 1 meter, roughly 3 feet long. Functional limbs still intact, recognizably lizard-shaped. Not a finished ocean predator, a transitional one, already hunting in the shallows, but not yet committed to open water. There's a genuine debate worth naming here. Mosasaur ancestry is most strongly supported as sitting within the Varanid lizards, the group that includes today's Komodo dragons and Nile monitors, though a competing hypothesis linking mosasaurs more closely to snakes still has some support in the literature. The Varanid link remains the better evidenced position,
but it isn't unanimous.
What happened next moved fast by geological standards. Within roughly 4 million years, a span still around 800 times longer than the whole of recorded human history, limbs that once carried this animal across dry ground had reshaped into flippers. Not shrunken, not vestigial, full hydrodynamic control surfaces used for steering. Which raises the obvious question: if the limbs weren't providing thrust anymore, what was? For most of the history of mosasaur reconstruction, paleontologists drew the tail as straight, a long, tapering lizard tail, swimming the way a crocodile swims, the whole body flexing side to side. That reconstruction was wrong. Mosasaur tail vertebrae carry a distinctive downward kink partway along their length, a structural bend that straight-tailed reconstructions couldn't explain. Exceptionally preserved specimens from Angola and the Netherlands settled the question. Soft tissue impressions around that kink outline a tall upper tail lobe, oriented vertically, shaped like the tail of a shark.
Mosasaurus wasn't undulating side to side at all. It was swimming thunniform, the same rigid-bodied, vertical beat stroke used today by tuna, lamnid sharks, and dolphins. That single correction changes the entire energetics of the animal. Thunniform swimming is the most fuel-efficient large-body stroke that exists in open water. The cost of holding a rigid body and beating a narrow tail is dramatically lower than the cost of flexing an entire torso side to side. A mosasaur built this way could cruise farther, accelerate into a strike faster, and do both while spending less caloric budget than a lateral undulating animal of the same size. This was not an animal adapting to the sea. This was an animal independently arriving at the sea's most efficient possible body, 100 million years before any engineer would draw the same shape on purpose. The tail solved locomotion. The skull solved something else entirely. And this is where the design gets strange.
Ask what problem a 1.5 meter skull, roughly 5 foot, needs to solve, and the obvious answer is force. Bigger skull, bigger bite, more raw kinetic energy on impact. That's how a shark works. That's how a crocodile works. It isn't how mosasaurs worked. The outer teeth, the recurved cones lining the jaw margin that show up in every museum photo, were not the primary weapon. There's a second row, mounted on the roof of the mouth, on the pterygoid bones, angled backward toward the throat. Think of a one-way spike strip at a parking garage exit. Drive in, no resistance. Try to reverse, the spikes engage. Prey entering a mosasaur's mouth met exactly that geometry. The outer teeth gripped on the way in. The pterygoid teeth caught on any attempt to pull back out, driving deeper with every struggle.
Paired with a loosely hinged lower jaw, a flexibility similar to what lets a snake work oversized prey down its throat, a mosasaur could also reposition large prey inside its own mouth, between swallows. The honest scientific position here is that precise bite force numbers remain uncertain. Reconstructing force from fossil jaw geometry requires assumptions about muscle mass the fossil record simply doesn't preserve directly, and published estimates vary widely as a result. What the skeleton does confirm, unambiguously, is the design priority. Not maximum crushing force, but retention and control of large, actively struggling prey. Mosasaurus didn't just bite. It built a one-way door in the roof of its own mouth, and everything behind that door was a design choice about control, not force. Here is the most common misconception about Mosasaurus, and it's worth correcting directly. It wasn't a species holding a throne. It was a family running an entire economy. The Mosasauridae contained at least 40 known species, across more than 15 genera, spreading through every ocean basin on Earth between roughly 98 and 66 million years ago, the Cretaceous equivalent of the modern cetacean family, filling roles from orca to porpoise to sperm whale. Mosasaurus hoffmannii itself was the largest, 13 to 17 meters, roughly 43 to 56 feet, massing 10 to 15 metric tons, around 22,000 to 33,000 pounds. A large bull African elephant runs about 6 metric tons. This animal was 2 to 2.5 elephants, compressed into one fluid predatory hull.
But the smaller genera tell the more interesting story. Platycarpus, at around 7 meters, roughly 23 feet, was built for speed and tight course corrections, an active fish hunter with agility the massive Mosasaurus never had. Globidens carried rounded, blunt teeth built to shatter ammonite shells and turtle carapaces rather than pierce flesh. Tylosaurus, close to Mosasaurus in length, at roughly 12 meters, around 39 feet, carried a blunt, toothless snout tip that current evidence suggests was used for ramming, stunning prey, or settling contests between rivals. And here is the assumption worth naming directly. The common image of an apex predator is a single dominant species, holding the top by eliminating everything that competes with it. That isn't what the fossil record shows. The same rock layers in Kansas, the same Angolan outcrops, the same Dutch marl beds yield multiple mosasaur species side by side at the same time. They weren't excluding each other. They were partitioning the ocean. Different sizes, different tooth shapes, different prey. The same niche division we see among whale species sharing an ocean today. There's a genuine debate still running underneath all of this. Were mosasaurs cold-blooded, like the monitor lizards they descended from? Or did they generate their own body heat? Oxygen isotope analysis of mosasaur bone tissue shows body temperatures elevated above the surrounding seawater, consistent with at least regional endothermy, the same partial internal heating strategy lamnid sharks use today. The debate isn't fully settled, but fossils recovered from seasonally cool Cretaceous latitudes argue against a fully cold-blooded animal confined to warm shallows. Mosasaurs didn't dominate the Cretaceous ocean by being the one best predator. They dominated it by becoming the entire predatory apparatus.
For roughly 27 million years, more than 5,000 times longer than the entire span of recorded human history, mosasaurs sat at the top of every connected ocean on Earth. Then, 66 million years ago, a bolide 10 to 15 kilometers, roughly 6 to 9 miles across, struck the Yucatan Peninsula at around 20 kilometers per second, roughly 45,000 miles per hour, fast enough to cross the entire continental United States in under 4 minutes. The energy released has been estimated at around 100 teratons of TNT equivalent, roughly 1 billion times the yield of the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The blast, the tsunami, the seismic shock, catastrophic at regional scale, but not the mechanism that killed off an open ocean apex predator on the other side of the planet.
The real killer was arithmetic. Ejecta and sulfate aerosols thrown into the upper atmosphere cut solar radiation reaching the surface by an estimated 75 to 80%. The difference between an ordinary day and a permanent, unbroken overcast, sustained for months. Phytoplankton, the base of the entire marine food web, collapsed within weeks. Now, run the numbers forward. A large Mosasaurus hoffmannii, 15 metric tons of active, partially warm-blooded pursuit predator, needed an estimated 50,000 to 100,000 kilocalories a week just to maintain body condition and reproduce, roughly 4 to 7 times an adult human's entire weekly food intake. That figure carries real uncertainty,
but it's constrained by what similarly sized warm-blooded marine predators need today. Collapse the phytoplankton, and zooplankton crash within weeks. Small fish and cephalopods follow within months. The large, energy-dense prey a 15-metric-ton predator depends on doesn't decline gradually. It falls off a cliff.
The largest mosasaurs, the ones with the highest weekly caloric demand, would have run into an unpayable energy deficit first, within centuries of the impact, possibly less. The smaller specialists may have held on slightly longer in pockets of surviving prey, but the entire guild was drawing against an economy that had already stopped existing. Mosasaurus didn't lose a contest with a better predator. The floor was removed from underneath an entire ocean, and no adaptation built over 27 million years could out-engineer that. Picture the alternate version of this. The bolide misses, or fragments, or lands too small to trigger sustained photosynthetic collapse. The mosasaur radiation continues into the Paleocene. The ecological vacancy that small, unremarkable land mammals spent the next 20 million years evolving into, the vacancy that eventually produced whales and dolphins, never opens. The pressure that pushed the ancestors of orcas back into the ocean simply isn't there to push. Every whale you've ever watched breach on a nature documentary occupies that ocean because an arithmetic problem 66 million years ago got solved by geology instead of biology.
There is a shape in the water again. It isn't driftwood this time. You already know that. What's harder to see is that it never really left. The Varanid blueprint, the recurved teeth, the loosely hinged jaw, the forked tongue reading chemical trails through the surrounding medium, didn't vanish with the Cretaceous. It walks today on Komodo Island, across the African savanna, in every monitor lizard alive, carrying a land-adapted echo of the same chassis that once covered every ocean on the planet. The sea has been invaded from land 3 separate times in the history of this planet. The ichthyosaur and plesiosaur lineages in the Triassic, the mosasaurs in the Cretaceous, the ancestors of whales in the Eocene. 3 unrelated lineages, 3 different starting bodies, and each time, roughly the same thermodynamic problem produced roughly the same solution. A rigid trunk, a vertical tailbeat, a body converging toward the shape that water itself rewards. Evolution didn't build one perfect ocean predator. It kept discovering the same answer from 3 different starting points because the ocean was only ever going to accept one kind of design. The shape passes beneath the surface one last time and disappears into deeper water. Nothing about it was ever built for the sea. It became water anyway.